Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On this week's docket, Conor McGregor is back in the news, and not in a good way. Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou came face to face down in hot Atlanta. And if you've been hearing the rumors involving Bellator and PFL, so have we. We'll talk about that and much, much more. Hello, everyone. I'm Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week, SVC creator goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He's in Sin City right here with me. The Boston shot caller is back. Nolan King joins us this week from Beantown. Batting cleanup, it's the MMA media titan, Mike Bond. He's in Toronto. He'll also be doubling up on the ones and twos. Let's get started. All right, guys. Last week, Conor McGregor found himself back in the headlines again. Same night and location as that mascot incident. Game 4 of the NBA Finals in Miami, except this time, some serious allegations were lobbed his way by a young lady who claimed he sexually assaulted her. The UFC superstar try saying that with Bell's palsy. The UFC superstar denied the allegations. Although the woman reported the alleged sexual assault to local authorities, she apparently does not want to press charges. Her attorney stated that the woman is only seeking settlements with McGregor, the Heat, and the NBA. Guys, there's also been a few videos that have come out since the allegations, but all we can see is the partying that's kind of going on outside the bathroom. We don't know what happened inside the bathroom. There's no footage of that and no witnesses. What bothers you guys the most about this latest news surrounding the Irish superstar, and what do you guys think comes out of all this? Mike Vaughn, we go to you for the first take.
Man, there's a lot of different elements to this. Of course, just as we talked about last week a little bit, right? When we just knew the mascot situation or saw that, it was like just the pattern of behavior from Conor McGregor continues to be alarming, right? Like, you have to be very careful when you're talking about situations like this, of course, because there's a lot of, alleged and certain things like that. We haven't even seen a police report yet, which I think is kind of maybe the next step in this entire story right now. But as far as like what we know from what we've seen on the video, the claims and stuff, Conor McGregor is just putting himself in bad situations, right? Like coming out of this, at best, maybe he's showing that he's being, unloyal to his wife and things like that. And at worst, it's, these claims prove true, which would be, pretty disturbing if that's the case. And of course, this isn't the first time he's been caught up in a headline like this, whether, all of those other things have kind of like fizzled in the end. He hasn't seen a courtroom for an incident like this, but it's happening repeatedly, right? And you have these people out there that, in their sense of trying to defend it, like, Conor McGregor, they're just making claims, trying to come for his money, things like that. Well, there's a lot of other athletes in the world that are making just as much, if not more money than Conor McGregor, and they don't seem to be caught in these type of headlines over and over and over. So we can only talk about this in very vague terms right now, because we don't want to make, any assumptions that this whole thing is accurate. I know people are saying from the thing TMZ put out, from the letter that her lawyer apparently sent, do the videos add up, or do the details add up with the video? There's a lot of just moving parts here, so I don't want to make any assumptions. All you can say is it's not great that Conor continues to find himself in these situations with these headlines, when a lot of other athletes in his position seem to be able to avoid this if you're under the assumption it's all false.
Yeah, good way of putting it. We just don't know enough, but man, the guy just keeps getting himself in some pickles. All right, Nolan, the first take should have been yours. I goofed that, so please proceed.
Yeah, no worries. Honestly, a lot of what Mike said was kind of the route that I was going to go down as well. I will say, just generally speaking, irregardless of this situation, I think it's oftentimes when we see Conor now in the news, with the exception of The Ultimate Fighter, it's usually for something that's not great. So that's an unfortunate, slow build, I guess, over time, where it seems like he's caught in the midst of more and more lawsuits, or just erratic behavior in general. Obviously, we have to see the details come out with this. We have those couple clips. We have what both sides are saying, but I obviously think that there's going to be a lot more that goes into the investigation. than that. As some people have pointed out online, you would think that the arena would have certain angles and cameras and whatnot. Obviously, I don't think one of them, the one place maybe in the arena there isn't any, is where this allegedly took place, in the bathroom. So I'm not sure how much that will, create more hearsay, or how much that will prove some of the facts or whatever. We have to just wait and see what happens. But it's obviously not a good look when stuff like this happens. Regardless, it's not good PR. And who knows what kind of impact this is going to have on him in his career. I know we've been questioning in recent weeks if he will even come back, if it was even on the docket or the agenda, but we've now passed that deadline that's necessary for him to fight in December. So in terms of his career, the can has been kicked down the road anyways, it seems like, unless we just don't know yet that he has entered the pool and the USADA testing pool, and we just don't have those results yet. But I think this will obviously maybe delay that a little bit. Who knows what kind of impacts it will have there. I know that's not the most important thing in this whole scheme, but that's really the only thing I could add to what Mike said, because I think he pretty much hit everything on the nose that I was going to say, even though he stole my spot in the order here.
No, that was my bad, man. I was looking at that and I saw you initially get focused. But anyway, all right, Goes, how about you? Is there anything you want to add to this? I do want to say that according to TMZ, one of the videos appears to be after the incident, in which they seem to be still commingling or speaking. I mean, there's no volume or anything like that, but what did you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, that's the tough part, right? Is you need to have all the information. But the one thing that you can do is just kind of look through history and see situations like this kind of pop up in Conor McGregor in his past. And I think the one thing that I do want to add is whether all this gets proven or not, I think he's at the point in his career where he has so much money, so much to protect what he's done for our sport, all that stuff, his family. He needs somebody to be making better decisions for him, helping him out. Friends, when you have this much money, friends are the ones that kind of look past all that stuff. You need somebody to grab you, shake you, and say, you know what? You are not good in these situations. We need to get you out of here. You want to punch a mascot? Nah. My guy can't do that. He's a little past that. That's not something we should be doing right now. There has to be somebody that tells him these types of things. In regards to his fighting career, I mean, I don't know that we're going to see him anytime soon, guys. That's the problem. I love watching Conor McGregor fight. He brings in a lot of money. But even going forward, like I think Nolan brought it up, the Ultimate Fighter, like that. I don't know if you guys have seen the last couple episodes, but they're very fighter heavy. We don't really see very much coach interaction. And I think they're telling you a lot right there, right? If you're not going to have these guys fight, well, then what good is footage of them talking smack to each other and doing all that? It feels a little different now watching that. So hopefully somebody can get in this guy's ear and maybe not even put him in these situations where these bad things can happen.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll go around the horn one more time if you guys want to add anything, but let me just say a few things. I think what's stupid about all this is in this day and age, everyone has a camera. He's acting foolishly in that regard. So let's just say he went in the bathroom and whatever allegations are thrown about that are uncovered to be untrue, right? Okay, great. That's what we want. We don't want to hear about a woman doing that, being, assaulted in any way. But again, just you can see him from time to time panning. The cameras are everywhere. How is this not computing? Guys, what was the name of that old man in the movie Titanic? It was the rich guy, Hockley, and he goes, talk to my man. There was an old man that seemed like to have his back. He would always be there to make sure, kind of to protect them. That's what McGregor needs, is just someone like that to begin with. I imagine he rolls with security, but are they not thinking, like, I don't know, like they're slowly ruining this guy's life. Again, even if the allegations aren't true, maybe a potential sponsor. I mean, this guy is very, very, he's well known, he's popular. And why aren't like big companies attached to him? I feel like it could be doing so much more, even if he decided not to fight. And he's making like what I call like rookie mistakes in life. So I'm not even talking about like, oh, this is the way you get down at a club, or no. I'm just saying, like seriously, like you're making huge, huge errors, And also I want to address the chat. Yes, we do take questions. If they're good ones, great comments, okay. But stop with the haterish stuff. Man, this is our job to analyze the big stories in the sport. you never at any point have seen us accuse the guy of being guilty of it or anything. I mean, we're just, I guess, unpacking the big story. So talk with
Well, and I
that.
think George, just to jump in there, based off what you said before that, you know what he is guilty of at this point is just putting, you know, himself in situations that are leading to bad things, and I don't think you can place the blame on that around the people around him at this point. I mean, look at just who Conor McGregor is with, who, you know, even his coaches on the Ultimate Fighter, like there's a few of the old faces there, John Kavanaugh, Owen Roddy, stuff like that. But for the most part around Conor, when he's out in these situations, out at the basketball game or you know, Nabiza at the race car, like you don't see the old people you used to see around him at this point. And he has, you know, I'm sure at the stage of his wealth and his success where it's going to be very hard for people around him to tell him no, or tell him that he shouldn't do something out of fear, maybe for their own financial security, because maybe he's paying them to do a certain job or things like that. So he's like so beyond, to me, at least from what I've seen, being reeled in by certain people around him. He has the money, the freedom. He can do whatever he wants right now. So it's hard to get people to reel him in. And it seems like the last thing on his mind, you know, as we try to focus this, I guess, on the sport, is being in the gym, you know, training. When was the last time we saw him in Dublin putting in, you know, weeks and weeks of, you know, hard training dedicated towards a fight, things like that? It seems like the Michael Chandler fight is just extremely distant from his mind at this point. And there's a lot, everything else but preparing for that seems to be going on in Conor McGregor's life right now.
Mm-hmm. All right, you guys want to weigh in, Nolan or Goes, before we move on? I mean, I guess we kind of nailed it. Look, there's just not as much out there in a case like this other than that video footage. And to me, it just sounds ridiculous that she's accusing him. I don't mean to disrespect this topic because it's a sensitive topic, but all I've heard for years is how women, the hardest part is coming forward, right? And she did it immediately, day of, the next day, I don't know, something like that. It was fairly close to the incident, but yet no charges, just kind of wants to reach a settlement, you know what I mean? And so it seems kind of fishy, like just upon what I can see without having all the deets. How about you guys?
I mean,
sure. I mean, there's, oh, go ahead, Ghost.
Well, I was just going to say, maybe because it's such a sensitive topic, you know, sometimes I think people just want to stay as much out of the public eye as they can, get things over with. But yeah, man, this is just something like, regardless of what ends up happening, it's just the constant having his name attached to situations like this is, like you said, George, it's going to cost him in the sponsorship dollars or whatever down the line. I think people are just going to say, I just don't want to deal with this. You know, there's so many athletes out there in the world that you can attach your brand to. I don't have to go down this route.
And it's not over yet. You know, a police report will be forthcoming, I'm sure. The NBA is doing an investigation. The Miami Heat will be doing an investigation. This is happening kind of under their scope to a degree. So, yeah, we just need, not everything needs to be said right now. We will find out more and we'll be able to shed more light on it. So I think we can probably move on.
Okay. Sky V's and El Daddy said yes, played by the great Billy Zane. He played Cal Hockley. I'm wondering the name of the old man. All right. Moving on here. At the PFL event in Atlanta, Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou came face-to-face outside of the Smart Cage. Towards the end of the event, it was tense but cordial. Both men showed respect. They even uttered that word towards each other. But they also intimated that it's the other party's avoidance. You know, they're the ones accusing each other of kind of avoiding and failing to make this fight happen. But look, seeing these guys face to face, you know, up close for the first time, and together with that offer that we heard that UFC made to Tyson Fury, where apparently co-promoting is not as big of a problem as we thought. Gimmick fights are, you know, maybe on the table. That's what I'm getting at. In the octagon, by the way. Do you feel like this fight could indeed happen in the future somehow, where I think maybe in the past we've possibly shut it down? Here's some questions for you guys. Where and when would it take place? What would be the stakes? And even if the only thing on the line was the title of baddest man on the planet, would that suffice at this point? All right, coming to you first, Mike, this time for real.
Man, this just felt like blue balls, right? Like that's the best way I would describe this entire video. Like it just shows what if, right? Like what should have happened, the fight we should have got, but like all those questions you asked, George, I feel like it's just doesn't even matter, right? Like, yeah, I'd love to see it tomorrow, a co-promotion in the UFC. They both get, with UFC PFL, they both get paid, you know, what they deserve, all that stuff, perfect world things. But it just felt like this is a tease of something that is so far unrealistic. Jon Jones posted a video of him facing off with Sergey Spivak, and that feels more realistic than this felt, right? Like at this event, that's how I saw it. It's just, I don't know, like it seems like it's past. Both these guys are just barking at each other from, you know, across the lane. And I don't think, I'm sure this didn't make Dana White and the UFC happy. You know, their second star in as many months going to another event wearing their like branded stuff, facing off with a fighter that's not in their organization. You know, speaking of Conor McGregor and Mike Perry there too. So it's just, I don't know. It was cool to see, obviously, but it just felt like it's not anywhere closer to happening. This was just a tease of one of the biggest fights of all time that the UFC failed to make, that isn't going to happen. And, you know, like both these guys are going to fight other people next, most likely, before they fight each other. So if they keep winning, maybe it inches closer to reality or something, but like it only takes one loss on either side or a retirement from Jon Jones or something. And it's just, this our closest thing to seeing these two in the octagon is them facing off outside the cage at PFL.
The good thing is they both are going to fight under the ESPN banner, so maybe that'll make it easy. All right, how about you guys? What do you think about all this?
I don't think this fight ever happens, man. That's the problem. You know, you sit there and you watch it, and it's fun because you get to size them up. You get to see their reactions to what each other says. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's anything that's going to come out of it. No fight. And if it ever does, it have to be further down the road, because I think that the biggest obstacle that happens when you have these big fights is when fighters have options. And that's what Francis Ngannou has. He has options, right? If he wants to make a lot of money, he can box. It could still happen. And he's got his deal over there with PFL. And Jon Jones has his with the UFC. They have options. And Jon, the problem with Jon is I feel like if you're the baddest man on the planet, you can't be chasing other people. They need to come to you. And that to me says a lot. The fact that he's constantly the one chirping, coming after Francis Ngannou, I think it only really cements that, you know, a lot of people feel that Francis Ngannou leaving the way he did, he's still the baddest man on the planet. And it's Jon Jones. It's up to him to kind of prove him wrong. I think that bothers Jon Jones a little bit. They have these mind games that they play. I like Jon Jones referring to the jiu-jitsu and the wrestling and all that. He was trying to get in Francis Ngannou's head, but Francis has done a really good job, not just with Jon Jones, but with Dana White. Just anytime these comments come up, he's really cool, calm, and collective. And we don't really see that in MMA. A lot of guys get flustered, they get really pissed off, and they start saying crazy things back. He's just been really cool and calm. And it's almost like, you know, like when your dog is just acting up, and then all of a sudden you just kind of start to pet him and he calms down a little bit. That's what he did to Jon Jones. Like Jon Jones just kind of chilled out and was like, yeah, you're right. And just kind of walked away. It was kind of funny, to be honest. But as far as getting like a payoff in the end, I just don't see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really, really a nice face-off. I enjoyed it. It sounded a little bit like one of those country duos, you know, doing karaoke, because they were repeating each other at first. Respect, respect. You don't want to smoke. You don't want to smoke. You know, and then finally they were getting to talking about wrestling and other things. But man, I was watching it just going, damn, it's a shame if we don't get to see this. But something about that little reunion and the fact that they're both on ESPN, I want to try and stay optimistic that it could happen later in 2024. Mike's right. They got to fight others first. But I want to stay optimistic. What say you, Nolan King?
It kind of, I don't know, it was weird. I mean, it was good to see them like sizing each other up, kind of gets the brain flowing on, oh, okay, Jon's not that much smaller and everything like that. But for me, I don't know, man, it's just like almost seeing it in the circumstances that it was happening under just almost made me think it's even like more unrealistic than what I expected. I think it just kind of gave off like real, like forced, inorganic PR photo op vibes to me. You know, Jon being there cornering somebody, and that's the way that they get it done, is that Francis is a guest fighter there. Like it felt like if like at the UFC Hall of Fame, they have like Anderson and GSP square off and everybody's like, oh, that would be kind of cool, but it's not going to happen. Like, haha, you know, and then they kind of go separate ways. That's what it felt like to me. And I think, you know, it's the millionth example of us talking about a super fight, a cross promotion fight that likely is not going to happen. I mean, how many times have we sat on a panel like this or online and talked to, everybody there about, oh, what if they did, Bellator champ versus UFC champ, or PFL champ versus I almost said Bellator, but that might actually happen now. We've talked about this a million times, and how many times has it happened? It's never happened. So it's a fun debate. It's cool, but when it comes to getting me excited, I think we need to have some path to realism, to a realistic scenario here. And that just isn't, we don't have that right now. I mean, it was enough of a hassle for Francis to get a clause in his contract that he can go box, never mind, cross promote with the UFC. So it's cool that we got that image in our heads. We can pretend that it might happen sometime, or get excited about what if it were to happen. But for me right now, it's getting tabled in the back of my brain until somebody's contract allows them to do so.
I got a comment here from the chat. Scott Christian says, Jones and Francis will never fight. Dana's interest is one thing, to not allow the PFL or Francis to gain a foothold in Western Africa. Mike, does that make any sense to you, possibly? I mean, both organizations have talked about Africa. So does this have legs, his comment?
I don't think that's like their first concern, right? Like maybe it's somewhere on the checklist of like 10 things, but I don't think UFC freaked out when like Bellator beat them to Paris or something like that. It's just not, I don't think on the high list of concerns. Like, maybe if they had Francis on that card and it was like a huge, stadium event wherever in Africa, it would make sense. They'd be like, damn, we wish we could have had that with, Izzy and Francis and Usman when they were all champions. But like, I don't think that's what's going to be most frustrating for them. If, it's Francis and Ngannou versus Attila, like whoever, right? Like some random PFL heavyweight. I don't think that's going to bother them. But if they can, have a part in Francis versus Tyson Fury or something, it happens in Africa or something like that. There's, I think it's a different level, but just putting on an event there, I don't think they're too worried about it.
Mm-hmm. Guys, what if they came up with a crazy idea of just no belts, no PFL, no UFC? It's just a business transaction. Those two fight for the baddest man on the planet. I don't think Dana would do it, but if they did, I think we're all in, right? It doesn't have to be for a belt or anything. We just want to find out who's the baddest of these two. It appears that these two are, the baddest men on the planet right now. We're not even thinking about Fury or Deontay or anything. We respect what they do in the boxing ring, but baddest man on the planet, it's one of these two.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the thing is, it's a difficult one to call. Like, situation. How would that fight go down? Obviously Francis Ngannou's got a huge, maybe not huge, but he's got an advantage on the feet. And like Jon Jones pointed out, there are times where you think maybe the wrestling, the jiu-jitsu might not be up to par. We know they're up to par with Jon Jones. Jon Jones is about as well-rounded as you can be. He's just a smaller heavyweight, right? This is kind of Francis's world. So hell yeah, I'd be in for something like that.
Mike, can you show that B-roll? Was that an accident, or can you show that?
Yeah, no, we can show a little bit of it. It might be showing some of our screen. Here, hold on.
Someone got to get this done. Jody boy. That's right. But who's not going to happen? We're over here. It's over there. Let's get it in the You know you don't want no smoke. Huh? You know you don't want no smoke. You know I want all the smoke. You know I want all the smoke. And the one true king. With the one true king. Listen, I give you a respect for that, but I want that smoke. You know that. I've always been king. Huh? I've always been king. Since the day I started this. And I'm going to die a king in your division. In the heavyweight.
Pretty good stuff, man. I like
that. Is good. That definitely gets you a little fired up. But yeah, I don't know. Just feels, as I said off the top, feels further than ever at this point. It's interesting, though. I was going to ask you guys, do you find it, the reaction to this, when Conor went to BKFC, right? Like everyone was like, oh my God, this is so good for bare knuckle, like their brand, blah, blah, blah. They got Conor McGregor to do this. They have Jon Jones there at a PFL event wearing the shirt facing off with their guy cage side. I don't see all these people being like, this is so great for PFL's brand. This is going to help take them to the next level. Why do we think it's like different?
It definitely doesn't hurt them. right? Like, I
No,
mean,
for sure. But I
yeah,
don't see anyone talking about that, right?
Yeah, McGregor's just more popular, I
Yeah.
think, is what it boils down to. His fans are more passionate. Although I can't say that. Jones, man, there's some Jones fans that'll come at you if you say even the darndest thing. But
I think for me,
have,
the thing with Conor too was like that was such a shock factor. I think the fact that we knew that this was going to happen beforehand might have played into it a little bit. Like people kind of put 2 and 2 together, you know, the day before, and it had been talked about. Whereas Conor was like, "What the hell? Why is he here?" You know? Oh, and I think the thing was too with like bare knuckle, like kind of a little bit, you know, kind of a step down from PFL in terms of like the way that they're accepted and legitimized in the sport. So maybe that was it too. It was almost like even bigger of a gap of bringing somebody up because there was more room in between, you know, the big Conor McGregor appearance and BKFC than PFL, which is kind of an established brand.
and Connor's been able to get out and kind of call his own shots before, right? When he brought up Floyd Mayweather, we all went, "Get out of here, dude. This is never gonna happen." He actually made that happen. So maybe him being in that BKFC, you go back to some of those memories and go, "Oh, you never know. Maybe he can make that happen." Like maybe with Jon Jones, we just felt like that's clearly UFC and that's clearly PFL, and it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah.
Was the face-off on the broadcast, or was that social media only?
They showed, I think, like a snippet of it, but there was no audio. It was like, I think at the very end, they had like an overhead cage side angle that went out, and you could see like, you know, Francis and Back talking to John, and the commentators were just like, "Oh, the image you wanted to see all night," but there wasn't any audio until after the fact. All those reporters cage side. Smart for them. It happened pretty much right in front of Media Row, it seemed.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm going to remain optimistic maybe in 2024 at some point, because what makes Dana White's tail wag is money. And if there's a big money fight, I think, will at least consider it or see, you know, what can we do to make this happen? And one obstacle has always been, I hate to keep bringing it up, but when you're talking about Bellator and UFC, the first thing is, well, we're with Showtime, you're with ESPN, and that's why I keep bringing up the fact that at least we know they're both on ESPN. Is that one less obstacle, you know? And Dana has always spoken highly of the PFL. He really hasn't shot them down. So again, if there's
until now, we'll see what happens the next time he gets asked about them on that one.
What would suck for Dana, though, is if that fight happens and Ngannou does win, then his heavyweight champ just got knocked out. Whether there's a belt or not, that's something I think Dana would not want to experience, because he is still haunted by Chuck Liddell going to Pride in 2003 for the Grand Prix that they had, and he lost over there. And back then, man, we used to call them Pride nut huggers and UFC nut huggers, and they would clash a lot. And you know what? Back then, maybe even Pride was regarded as number one, UFC number two, whatever. But when that loss happened, I mean, it was huge. And then there was a time where I think Vanderlei was brought in before they fought to do a face-off. And that fight was being talked about. And then it never happened. And I think it got under Dana's skin that people would bring up that Pride kept getting the best of them. One, when this guy went down there and got knocked out. Two, when Pride sent Vanderlei, you know, got a little FaceTime, and then nothing happened, you know. Of course, in the end, Dana White won. He bought Pride, or the, you know, all the footage and some contracts. But still, I think he's a little haunted from some of those events. But man, that was almost 20 years ago. You would think that right now he has so much control over what can and can't happen, that a big money fight like this, learn from the lessons. We didn't get Fedor versus Randy. We didn't get Anderson versus GSP. We never got Ronda versus Cyborg or whatever else. I don't even know if that one's on that level, but you guys know what I mean. Dude, this is a big one. And we haven't even gotten Nate versus Conor 3. You know what I mean? And who knows if that's even going to be appealing if and when it happens, considering both guys have definitely slowed down. So I don't know. Make this fight happen is all I can say. It's a huge fight. It's a stadium fight.
I think it's too late. We'll see.
It could be. It could be. All right. We are going to move on. I'll keep looking at the comments. I know some good ones are starting to pour in. So thank you, Scott Christian, for opening the floodgates there. Not everyone's a Muppet in the chat room, we found out. All right, here we go. Bellator president Scott Coker told the media this week that rumors about a possible merger with another promotion, possibly the PFL, that they're true. So here's Big Daddy Cokes talking about the situation. We've been out there.
I can play the clip, George. Yeah.
There's been a lot of talks too about a sale. Any truth to that sort of those reports?
Yeah, listen, we've been out there, and Bellator has been looking to take a partner, and that's really Viacom's been handling that. So we'll see where that nets out. Really, it's we'll probably have some clarity in the next 60 to 90 days.
Any truth about the PFL rumors?
They're definitely in the conversation. So there's a couple conversations going on right now with Viacom and a couple companies, and PFL is definitely one of them.
Great, thanks.
Our own Nolan King pitching the questions there to Big.
Great questions. Great questions.
Yep, exactly. So, look, even Dana White has hinted about these rumors a few weeks back. As you hear all this, let me ask the fan in you first. What do you want to possibly happen, and what do you think will happen? Because they've talked about a partnership, possible some equity, or PFL outright buying them. Even one championship got thrown into this mix. But so the fan in you, what would you guys even want to happen? Let's start with Goes on this one.
The fan in me right away says, yeah, hell yeah, let's do this, right? I mean, if you're a big mixed martial arts fan, think about how much of your time was spent this weekend. There was PFL, it was Bellator, there was UFC. That is a lot of time and a lot of days invested in watching the sport. If you're going to take one of them days out and just give me a more stacked card between a Bellator and PFL, I'm totally in on something like that. Now, as you start to sit down and think about it a little bit more from that fan perspective, these cards are going to be a little bit more stacked. And isn't that kind of what keeps these guys out of that pay-per-view realm, right? Is sometimes the cards just don't add up. Every now and again, you have one. If they become more consistent on pay-per-view, now you're asking me to dish out money for UFC, Fight Pass, BKFC, ESPN Plus, the occasional boxing. And now on the regular, I might have to add a couple, 4 or 5 more pay-per-views per year. That part might suck a little bit, but really your mind can get blown when you think about some of the possibilities of what can happen here. Is it that you love the PFL season format and it becomes something bigger with that? Or do you like more the Grand Prix that happen at Bellator? Or do they do both? I don't know. I mean, the sky's the limit there, but as a fight fan, I think you could get pretty happy about some of the things you could do here.
Mm-hmm. All right, how about you, Nolan? What are you envisioning as a fan that you would like to happen between these two powerhouses if they were to get together?
Yeah, I mean, as a fan, I would love to see it. I think it spices things up a bit. Bellator has been, I think the biggest thing that's hurt them has been being on Showtime, just because people have to shell out that extra money. Whereas now, depending on how they structured with a merger in terms of pay-per-views or regular, ESPN Plus or ESPN shows, I do think overall it would be much more accessible for people to see, the Bellator current Bellator fighters compete. I think that, as we talked about at the end of last year, Bellator, in my opinion, has a pretty clear-cut number 2 in terms of the talent pool, but their biggest enemy has been behind that paywall. So I think that would be exciting for the fans that buy ESPN Plus to pretty much solely watch the UFC. Like, it would be more of a reason to suck them into, the PFL product, or whatever you want to call this, PFLator, as I think Mike called it, this new product. So I think that would be great. I think that some of again, would depend on, there's so many questions that would remain about what a merger would mean, right? Would they still stick with the season format? Would they go for pay-per-view? Would they go for fight night sort of things? Would they do, a season and then regular cards? It's really hard to say. But I think overall it would just make things interesting. It would make things, you'd have those crossover fights potentially that we always talk about, but have never actually happened. So I would love it, honestly. I think it would be very interesting times in the MMA world. And I think that the fact that Scott Coker brought it up, and we're not brought it up, but Scott Coker openly talked about it and openly talked about PFL last week and mentioned a specific timeline, which I thought was interesting. If I had one more follow-up, if it had come into my brain, I would say, why did you say 60 to 90 days? Is that some sort of timeline you're being given? Is there already something in place? The fact that he acknowledged PFL makes me think that there's a pretty strong likelihood that it's going to happen. So I'm excited to see what happens. And I think this whole merger would be something that would be pretty historic for MMA.
That would have been a great follow-up. You must have been thinking about that deep dish Chicago pizza you were going to smash next. So we'll give you the pass. All right, Mike, that's brilliant, by the way. PFLator, I like it. What's your take on all this? What are you hoping, man? That the PFL roster goes this way, the Bellator roster goes that way? What format? What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? That's all the unknowns that we could get excited about. Would they even do that, right? Would they try to keep it two different entities and maybe just have like a fighter come here, make a fight there that's crossover? They can call it co-promotion when it's really under the same umbrella, more or less. Maybe try to make it feel special that way. I don't know. I definitely like kind of what Go said. Like, if we could combine the two and have maybe less shows or like a median, put the mean in terms of like number of shows and boost the quality, all that kind of stuff, like that would obviously be good for people like us who get grinded to a pulp with the insane MMA schedule like we just had, this past weekend, for example, with UFC, PFL, and Bellator all putting on shows. Like, it's just kind of never ending and so much going on and hard for anything to feel special or different or stand out. So I assume if they do make this happen, obviously PFL or whatever kind of brain trust or money, financial support that would come from their end would be like the shot callers. And they clearly feel that their brand is better than what Bellator is doing in most, if not all areas. So if I'm just guessing, smartest thing to do would be like to pick the best fighters from Bellator and bring them over, right? And if you have to cut bait on some of the lesser guys and move on from them just to strengthen one roster, like that would seem like the best thing to do. But I would be curious, how would a Patricio Pitbull feel about doing the season format with like all those 4 fights in 1 year when he's already done the format tournament Grand Prix thing under like 2-3 different regimes over in Bellator. So that would be the stuff that would be tricky. Would they reserve guys like that for like their pay-per-view super fight series? I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns, but it is exciting. Talking about this gets my blood flowing and my juices going a little bit more than just being like, hey guys, like, you stoked for Bellator 298 or 2023 PFL 7? Like, this is more exciting to me. So we'll see where it goes.
And think about too how tense, like say that a merger does happen. And I know this was the case, I believe, with the UFC Strikeforce deal as well, though that was a little bit before I started kind of covering the sport in this sort of way. But like, how tense would the last few Bellator events be for some of those guys on the prelims, right? Like Mike said, they're probably not going to bring the entire roster over. Maybe they would, maybe I'm wrong. But to me, like, I think you would see some guys that are like, you would look at a card and be like, damn, like 7 of these fights, like these guys are probably fighting for their job. So, that wouldn't be, obviously that's not like an ideal thing to root for, but it just would add the pressure, the high stakes to those sort of events. The last few would be pretty fascinating. Who's going to be the final Bellator champion ever? I would assume they would have used the PFL name. Maybe they'll go with Mike's suggestion of PFL-ator, but man, there'd be so many things to get us talking I think it would bring in a lot of eyeballs of people that don't watch these promotions too. It would just create such a buzz that it would be unavoidable for people that are into MMA.
I don't think they could do the regular season and the playoffs anymore. I think they would have to come up with Grand Prix that can possibly take longer than a year because there'd be too much talent coming over. But they would gain a middleweight division,
both, right?
Yeah.
You could
gain
a
middleweight division. They would gain a bantamweight division. We now have Cyborg versus Kayla, very possible. I think some of the Bellator fighters that don't make it over are now possible Dana White Contender Series or that series that PFL is doing. Mm. So, I don't know. I'm thinking of some of the positives that can come out of this.
And I think that the interesting thing is, right, like all that stuff they could figure out. It's just like, how do they make money from something like this? Their money back, and I think it's from pay-per-view, right? And we see Trey and Scott Christian in the chat being like, if they do a pay-per-view, are you buying that event with PFL and Bellator fighters? How much would it be priced? Stuff like that. I mean, definitely there's more legs to it than there would be before, right? Like whatever PFL pay-per-view is happening next, Francis Ngannou most likely in the main event. And then from there below, I mean, you can mix and match talent. And you could do a lot more that would be interesting and worth your money than just a PFL pay-per-view from their roster they have now. I mean, Francis Ngannou in the main event, Cyborg versus Kayla Harrison in the co-main event. Throw whatever else you want on there. I'm buying that right away, whether it's $50, $60, $70. So can they get repeats of that? Can they draw interest in the next pay-per-view after that one? Those are where the big questions in terms of like longevity and all that stuff start to come in.
Yeah, and just even saying that, I think is like, think about how far like PFL's come to a certain degree. Like when they were World Series of Fighting and they didn't really have an identity, and then we're like, oh, they're changing their name, and they did a couple of events. And then we kind of thought they were on the ropes there for a while. And so I think there's some accomplishment here from both sides to be able to, maybe the first time that we've ever been on a show like this where I can say that a promotion could put together a pay-per-view that would be worth buying, like 100%. You know what I mean? If you have me pay $50-$60 to see a bunch of champ versus champ Bellator PFL fights with Cyborg and Harrison on there, whatever, and Ngannou, like that's the sort of thing that I can't think of another time since I've been following this, that there's been a card that could be put on in full, not just one fight, that would be worth that amount of money to a consumer, at least for me, the consumer and me. So that's big within itself. But Mike said, like, what is going to be the next thing? How do you keep people there afterwards? That's going to be tough, if not very unlikely that they can do that.
Pro Fights Info says, I think it would be cool if they allow the season format for those that want it. Keep the Grand Prix alive and then do the regular UFC Bellator format shows from time to time. I was thinking, okay, the ones that do choose to be in it, they can do it. And at the very end, I guess whether you win the million or the million and a title shot, that would be nice. And then the other ones, the veterans that don't want to do a tournament, they just kind of compete at a different pace, right? But I think they could find a way to maybe make both of them work. That's a good point by him. A lot of ideas. But, guys, doesn't it sound like, and I hate to speculate, but doesn't it sound like if anyone's buying anyone, it is PFL buying Bellator? Right? Yes. I mean,
I mean, Scott kind of bounced around the word. I think he used the word partner, which, again, I don't know if that was like a PR sort of thing or if it was accurate, if they're not going to actually own them, if they're going to, because I think he said afterwards in the press conference that, you know, Viacom would still be involved somehow, which I don't know exactly how that whole thing would work out. So I guess time will tell, but it's certainly an interesting thing to try to predict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe. I mean, you see stuff out there like, you know, John Nash from Bloody Elbow, who does great reporting on kind of the business side of MMA. You know, he's tweeted out that he's heard like outside people who are not PFL, a different group, are kind of the leading candidate from his reporting. So who knows where this goes, but it is interesting. And in terms of like what on the surface seems like the best thing for MMA, or the most intriguing thing for MMA would be this partnership or merger or buyout or whatever you would want to call it, because someone else just comes in and tries to take over Bellator. What's kind of the future there in terms of a television deal, roster size, travel, all those kind of things. There's an infrastructure already in place with PFL that would make this, I think, the smoothest merger or whatever they want to make this thing.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to see like who runs ship too, who runs day to day. I know PFL has Ray Sefo, who I think, you know, is obviously embedded in the MMA community, but I don't think it would hurt them to kind of have a Coker or a Mike Kogan in the mix as well. Like it seems like they do a very good job at, you know, the business side of things. They do good on social media. They do good putting their brand out there, advertising. They have investors. Don Davison goes and speaks at all these, you know, business conference things, you know, so stuff that's not the world that I live in or the world that we live in. But I think it would benefit them. Like, I think a lot of managers and fighters and coaches kind of view them just like as a bunch of suits. Like, you know, if the money's right, they go there. But there's not really that relationship sort of thing outside of Ray that, you know, we've known each other for 15 years and I know this gym and I know where to get talent. And whereas Bellator seems like that's one of the things that they thrive on is like they pick up these blue chip prospects early. They have the training partner from, you know, some guy that's Archie Colgan, who's the common link between Usman and Gaethje, you know, stuff like that they know because they are so connected. So that sort of crossover, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people, which is unfortunate, that work for Bellator or in general that get laid off because of this. We don't need two people working one job sort of thing. But I think it would benefit PFL to have somebody like a Coker or Kogan kind of stay on board just to kind of continue that rapport that they have with the MMA community.
I agree.
Who do we keep, Sean O'Connell or Mauro Ranallo?
Oh,
That will be a TV decision. So you'll probably is ESPN PFL is only through the end of the year, right? Do we know with ESPN?
I believe so. Yeah.
So that I don't know.
Yeah, and obviously, Mauro has a lot of things to do on Showtime and stuff like that. So with boxing, and I assume there would be more shows if they come together. Hopefully enough.
Bellator cage or the Smart cage?
I like the Bellator cage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough to say. It's kind of hard to see through the Bellator cage. We're getting very inside baseball here from outside. You could probably move on. But yeah, from the viewing experience, I've only been to one PFL event. It is a better viewing experience from outside the cage than the circular one.
Yeah, the circular one too is big debate
one more before we
whether or
move
not
on.
it prevents finishes too. So I would be fine with getting rid of that.
I had one more.
Okay.
PFL ring card girls or Bellator ring card girls, or do we just have them all?
PFL.
We move on to the next.
We move on. All right, we move on. Let's go. Let's go. We had 3 5-round fights this past weekend. Vadim Nemkov defended his light heavyweight title versus Yoel Romero. Sergio Pettis defended his bantamweight title versus Patricio Freire. And Jared Cannonier defeated Marvin Vettori via unanimous decision in the main event there at the UFC. So all the winners won via unanimous decision. But who was the real biggest winner from these big fights? So forecast to the future, guys. Who was the real big winner here? Nolan?
I'm going to go with Sergio Pettis, man. I was so impressed with him from start to finish last week, coming off of that knee injury. And you could tell that he was a bit uncomfortable during fight week. During the media day, he was profusely sweating. And I thought it was because of, maybe he just worked out or whatever. He kept apologizing. But then afterwards, after the fight, he kind of mentioned, that he was super nervous all week and he couldn't stop sweating and, getting the butterflies and stuff. But he went out there and when it was time, there was no ring rust. He went out there and performed, and it was a performance that he needed. I mean, talk about a guy that was totally overlooked by the fans, by potentially other fighters, potentially by Patricio in terms of just the talk and bringing up flyweight. There's always that kind of thought, are you looking too far ahead? And honestly, from the media too, I mean, all of our storylines were pretty much, Patricio goes for history. He's going for his 3rd title, and it's understandable. I mean, the guy's earned that. But for Sergio to block all that out, come back from injury, and then go out there and win every single round on all scorecards except for one judge gave 1 round to Patricio. I mean, that's incredible to go out there against the Bellator GOAT and do something like that. So good for him. I think it's even better for his brand because of the way that he won the title to begin with. There was some asterisks, some question marks. Oh, he was losing that fight to Horiguchi and he landed a lucky punch. There was nothing lucky about what he did on Friday night. He looked absolutely spectacular. And I think he's really, for the first time, as the guy that's, been kind of in his brother's spotlight, or Anthony Pettis' younger brother. Like, he's his own person now. He's his own brand. He's an established, really good, talented bantamweight fighter that we can have those conversations about where he fits in the world picture. Certainly I'm not saying that I think he's the best yet, but I think he's somebody that we can put in that really exclusive elite category if he continues to put performances on like this.
Throw me in there. I thought he was going to get smashed, man. Hats off to Serge. He got him. And then they bring in big old patchy mix to make it look like another mismatch is headed his way. But yeah, respect to Sergio Pettis. How about you, Mike Bond? Who was the biggest winner from those 3 fights that I mentioned?
Nolan's answer is pretty good there. I think that's probably the obvious one, but I think just maybe to add a little disparity there, it does come from Bellator, though, Vadim Nemkov, right? Because I think I'm sounding like Scott Coker here now, right? There is a conversation of who is the best light heavyweight in the world. He says, it's obviously clearly Vadim Nemkov, which he should, because that's his guy. I don't blame him when he comes out and says this seemingly after every champion title defense these days, but it's what you're supposed to do, man. He's promoting people, not, demoting them like some other guys in the space who are in that similar position. So, he's looked good, man. 5 consecutive title defenses in Bellator. I think that's the most by any champion in company history. So he is doing some very good things over there. He's teasing now, maybe I'll move up to heavyweight and go for a 2nd belt there. Conveniently timed with, his mentor, Fedor Emelianenko, retiring. And, he already knows Ryan Bader pretty well. He already took 1 belt from that guy. So maybe he wants to come and take the other one from him too. So there's some, I think intrigue there with Vadim Nemkov is a serious A+ guy for Bellator that you can make a legit argument. Is he better than these guys in the UFC, Yuri Prochazka, who obviously has some history with that kind of counts against him, but Jamal Hill, I think he would be at minimum competitive with all these guys. And the fact that we're even sitting here having this conversation is a good thing for Bellator, a good thing for them. So he's the guy that I think comes out with maybe his stock the highest in the world rankings, because as great as Sergio Pettis is and a lot of that stuff, maybe then post-fight narratives of should Patricio Pitbull have gone down? Did he cut too much weight? Was he too slow? Was he too, old? Too many wars? Things like that. And we've seen Sergio Pettis fighting some of these guys in the UFC. I know he's improved a lot since then, but like I still can't get that Rob Font fight out of my head. And we know Rob Font is like, not top 2 in the UFC right now. So it's kind of how I look at it. Nemkov's my choice, but both those champions over there in Bellator look great.
Should Nemkov fight Anderson before he moves up?
Yes. I think that one needs to happen again. I mean, look at Corey Anderson and what he's been able to do in his career. He is a very, very good light heavyweight, and I think that fight needs to happen one more time, especially when you think of the timeline, right?
Yeah, it was 1-1 going into the third, and the third was all but 5 seconds, and that round was going to go to Anderson. He had the momentum. Nemkov was injured, accidental headbutt, so it was a no contest. Had it happened right as the round expired, they would have gone to the judges' scorecards, and Anderson would have been champ. But of course, that didn't happen. So it was basically a no contest. And then, props to Nemkov. He beat him the second time. But I feel like he should fight that one before he goes away. Either way, Bader's got Linton Vassell up next, so that he's not going into a straight title shot. I think Vassell's got next. But how about you guys? As far as the question, who was the big winner for you?
I like both answers. I guess I'll be the tiebreaker here. I'm a sucker for storylines, and that Pettis Pitbull had so many storylines going in. I mean, it was completely littered with them. Could Pitbull capture another title? Is Pettis going to look good coming off of an injury? And then even having Patchy Mix outside sitting there like Clubber Lang when they finally brought him in, it was just like storyline after storyline. I really, really liked that, and it was a great performance for Sergio Pettis. He does have to always battle his opponent that's in front of him, but he's also kind of, and it's not so much between the brothers, the brothers get along. It's everybody else that kind of talks about, can one day Sergio overcome Anthony? So he's always battling things here and there, and a lot of people didn't have him doing too well going into the fight, and he shut us all up again, so many storylines coming out of that. I think Sergio Pettis' star shined a lot, but I like what Mike said about Nemkov. It's true. It's across the board, right? Across the board, we feel like that guy could give anyone a run for their title.
Damn, guys, no one loves Cannonier, age 39, incredible cardio, incredible output. Mike probably can tell us all the stats that all the records that he might have broken in the middleweight division. And even Izzy said, I think he had a reaction. He said, bro, you know what I mean? Like, you could tell Izzy is like, okay, I'll give that guy a second shot, whereas he's shut down others in the past. So mine goes to Cannonier, even though I'm not on the panel, but I every once in a while I like to chime in. What records did he break, Mike? I know you're all over this one.
Most significant strikes landed in a UFC middleweight fight was the big one, 241, which is also the 4th highest total all time in a UFC fight. So yeah, pretty impressive. And Marvin Vettori also broke records absorbing that many strikes. And I think combined between them, it was the most strikes landed in a UFC middleweight fight. So yeah, that was just absurd performance by Jared Cannonier, and an even more absurd chin from Marvin Vettori, who seemingly can't be knocked out.
And I will say, I think getting the bronze medal this week is not necessarily the worst thing. This was a strong week, I think, for the headliners. Like, all 3 guys really, I think, built their brand up. Like, 2 of them was kind of like the maybe we've been overlooking you sort of storyline. And then obviously Vadim is just kind of establishing himself now, like Mike said, is the best. So no, there's no losers here. Sometimes we go into the winner debate and it's like there's 2 good ones and then somebody that did all right. Like, no, like all 3 of these guys had a really good weekend for their brands.
After the show's over, I'm going to go up these stairs in my room, and I'll be breathing harder than Cannonier was breathing as he was talking to Felder after 25 minutes. I couldn't believe it, dude. That guy's so jacked. Incredible, man. Incredible cardio for 39-year-old.
You don't remember the last time we interviewed him? He was doing the interview on a Bowflex. Remember, he was like working out as he was talking to us. It's the weirdest thing.
Vaguely. I remember Cub Swanson doing a cycle thing once, but I didn't remember that one. All right, let's get to the last one real quick. You'll have to tighten up your game, guys. Zeroing in on the Cannonier-Vettori matchup, this fight was very impressive. Incredible display of power, cardio, ability to recover, etc. Could a fight like this be in the UFC's Hall of Fame down the road? In fact, being that the UFC Hall of Fame is coming up, that ceremony is coming up here on International Fight Week. What is a fight like you'd like to see get added in 2024? Take us down memory lane, fellas. What's a good one, Mike?
Oh man, there's a lot. I guess to answer the first question, like if this fight makes it in the Hall of Fame, it's going to be a long time from now, probably in a year where they don't have maybe many other options, which they should, right? They should have a laundry list of fights they could get in before this one. It's no disrespect, maybe just a little bit of a prisoner of the moment. It was a great fight, easily the fight of the night. We'll probably win MMA Junkies fight of the month when the end of the month comes and we all hand in our votes and do what we do every single month there. But to me, it was maybe a little too lopsided to be in there, right? Like that was Marvin Vettori had a great first round and showed incredible moments of like, you seem like he was done and then he was able to get together a little bit, maybe land like one shot. But outside of that first round, he wasn't able to sustain enough consistent offense and push back on Jared Cannonier enough for me to feel like this was like a Hall of Fame worthy fight there. The next one to me, and also, like, I do think it is important to give space to these Hall of Fame inductions, whether it's a fight, a fighter. Like, I want our fighters to be permanently retired, more or less, to go out there. I think the NBA has like a 5-year retirement window before you can go in the Hall of Fame. I'd like to see something similar in there. Like, I don't want to see Donald Cerrone, who retired 11 months prior to his induction, and things like this. And it's happening more and more constantly. But the fight I want to do is one that will be, by the time next year, 5 years removed from that, I believe. And it's Israel Adesanya versus Kelvin Gastelum from UFC 236, I believe. Just like an all-time epic fight. I was cage side for that one, and just amazing back and forth. Like I still have a clip of Izzy from the post-fight press conference where he literally looks like he was stung by a swarm of bees. His face was just completely blown up. It's on my Instagram, and it still does like ridiculous numbers and comments from people just being like, wow, like Israel Adesanya, he looks completely different there. I need to go back and watch this fight. Who was the man who did this to him? And it was Kelvin Gastelum, who obviously they went through an epic back and forth fight. Izzy dug deep. We have the memeable moment where he said, I'm ready to die, like all that stuff. It was just, it had everything you could want and more. Interim title fight, just closely contested decision, epic fight. So that's my choice to go in there next year.
That's a great one. How about you guys?
I like Zhang Weili and Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I think it's time to get the ladies in there. I thought they had a excellent, obviously I'm talking about their first fight. That fight, man, boy, did they lay it on each other. It was just nonstop, back and forth, and they wouldn't go away. You know, it was toe to toe, and they just showed a lot of guts in that fight. And it's something that I think a lot of people go back and refer to, and will just always remember the images after the fight. You know, you talked about the swarm of bees. It was something kind of similar here. That was they were getting pretty nasty in there, but that was a great fight. I think it deserves to go in.
That hematoma. Hell yeah, man. That was like 3 swarms of bees. How about you, Nolan?
Yeah, as I was sitting here listening to Mike, I mean, he's right about the letting it breathe for a little bit, but I don't know if it'll be next, but certainly at some point in time, I think that Yuri versus Glover Teixeira should definitely be in there. As anybody that follows me knows, you know, I have an appreciation for technique and being clean with your striking and having good cardio and having everything go smooth. But I think there's an element in MMA that I enjoy more, which is the mayhem, the madness, that sometimes when guys are exhausted, things get a little sloppy and it makes things even more fun. And I think that's what we had here. We had a little bit of everything, 5 rounds of 2 of the best light heavyweights in recent years, with a very unlikely finish and outcome with Yuri Prochazka submitting Glover Teixeira. I think that was a great fight. And it's unfortunate we never got to see it run back. We were close, never did. Glover's retired now, so maybe that's enough to kind of make this seem a bit nostalgic for an induction. But I think sometime, whether it's next year or 10 years from now, this will go in.
Awesome fight. I love that fight. If I'm not mistaken, Glover, who's never been submitted, got submitted by a guy who had never submitted anyone. So like they literally went to the very end, and you know, they were exhausted, but they put it all out there. And I don't mean that as a clown. I'm not clowning. I'm just saying it was kind of unique, you know.
Yeah,
but
the momentum shifts too.
The man won the world title from it, so shout out to him. It's unfortunate with that immediately they took it away from him, but hopefully he gets a shot to run him back. Mine would be the second fight between Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard. So I think that fits Mike's criteria. It happened more than 5 years ago. If you guys recall, I mean, that's the closest I think I've ever seen to a 10-7 was what Maynard did to Frankie in round 1, right? I mean, battered him. And then Edgar came back and won the next few rounds, and I think Maynard took one. It was called a split draw. So Edgar went home with the title. But, man, and going in, there was a feeling that because Maynard had unanimous decisions on years prior, that same feeling of, well, Patricio's going to mop, Serge. That's what's going to happen here. That's what a lot of people were saying behind the scenes with this one. Edgar did not. He had other plans. So I think that's a good one there. All right, we have a few extra minutes.
Before you do, I can snag one comment here. Pro Fights Info. Do any of you four think UFC would ever backdoor Fedor Emelianenko into their Hall of Fame using the fight wing or one of his Pride fights? I'd like it. What's a Hall of Fame Fedor fight? I don't know if there's anything that maybe is that competitive.
Yeah, not in the fight wing. Well,
maybe the first, maybe the Nogueira fight. That was pretty exceptional. And maybe you could do the Kevin Randleman fight if you wanted to, but that's more like one sequence. But
yeah,
he's definitely not going into. I like how the question was phrased because he's definitely not going in there just straight up. So maybe you could get him in there in a fight wing, but I think it'll be a while before they start doing Pride fights.
My question is, why not? Boss Rudin only had one UFC fight, and he's in. So
why not?
This guy got
the UFC
acquired.
Likes Boss Rudin. Is why not?
What's that?
Ego.
The UFC likes Boss Rudin.
Well, no. I'm not saying Boss doesn't belong. He was a stud, three-time King of Pancrase. He did win the UFC heavyweight title in that one fight. But what I'm saying is that was his only fight. Fedor never had a fight. I get that, but he did fight under Strikeforce, which I think the UFC was running Strikeforce at the time. They absorbed them. They absorbed Pride. It was really his shitty manager that kind of helped in Fedor not coming over. I've heard a lot of stories, whether it's from Clinch Gear or others, that just dealing with the manager was really, really the hard thing. But I think he could make it. I don't see how you. I wouldn't have a problem with Fedor being in the UFC Hall of Fame. I don't think Don Fry technically only fought 1 year in the UFC. I think he had like 9 fights, but he only fought 1 year. Kazushi Sakuraba didn't have many fights either in the UFC, and he's in. So I don't know. I think this is the one Hall of Fame that does tend to bend on their rules a little bit, if they have any. And how do you leave him out? There is an MMA Hall of Fame. I think there's a couple. Some are like now defunct or whatever. But until there's one of those, how's Fedor just not going to be acknowledged as one of the greatest ever? You know what I mean? It's got to happen.
They do what they want. There's a big ego involved in all this. And, you mentioned it earlier in one of the other topics. Like, think of all the things that didn't happen, that if the UFC is ever going to feel any type of shame, it's got to be not bringing that guy over into the UFC. So I think as far as they're concerned, if that name never gets spoken again, it's the best day of their lives. They want that to go away.
Well, he didn't like Tito, and I think he didn't like Tito worse than he didn't like Fedor. And Tito's in. He didn't like Miletich. Miletich is in. He didn't like Shamrock, and I know they invited Shamrock to do it. Only Shamrock declined, Frank Shamrock. So he has, I guess, given in a little bit. So now it's just he has to give in on this whole Fedor thing, But I don't think it's anything personal against Fedor. I think it's against Vadim Finkelstein, who we used to call Vadami. I think that's what he has to get over.
Yeah, but think about, look, he didn't like Tito Ortiz, but there's no way he could overlook what Tito Ortiz did in the UFC. With Fedor Emelianenko, think about how much time was invested saying this is not as good a fighter as you guys think, and then turn around and say, well, actually he was. He's just never going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Trey says in the chat room, Leon versus Usman could be in the Hall of Fame at some point. Do you guys agree?
No. That was more of an iconic moment rather than an iconic fight.
Yeah. Sky V's and El Daddy says, on the same topic, will Benson get into the UFC Hall of Fame?
Ooh.
Maybe one day.
He was a WEC champ and he was a UFC champ, and I think he had 3 title defenses in the lightweight division, which is equal to what Habib had, and VJ, if I'm not mistaken. So he does,
We could do this all day. Will Jim Miller get in the Hall of Fame? Daniel Cormier doesn't think so. Come back here next week.
I think he should. By the way. All right, real quick. Who had the prettiest finish from this past week, including UFC, Bellator, and PFL? Anyone have one? I like Larissa Pacheco's. How about you guys?
I got to say Manuel Torres, man. I have a soft spot in my heart for a standing elbow. And talk about a walk away, one elbow, walk off.
Mhm.
That was a pretty violent. It was honestly, there were some pretty good choices this week, but that's the one that sticks out in my brain.
But the
Mine was
entire PFL main card.
Carlos Hernandez, that epic slam into the elbows. Oh wait, that wasn't technically a finish, just a technical decision.
Oh, that's right. That's right. How about you guys? You got one?
The entire PFL main card. That was pretty fun, dude. Finish after finish after finish. But yeah, the one that stood out from all of them, I think, was Pacheco.
Amateur MMA, Biagio Ali Walsh didn't get paid, but he went out there and put a pretty exciting finish on his opponent. Lastly, and I'm going real fast here, Sarukian says, I want Chandler since it appears Chandler won't fight McGregor. You guys agree with that matchup, or you got other plans for Sarukian and or Chandler? Mike?
Man, like I feel bad if this is where things end up for Michael Chandler, right? Like going from Conor McGregor to this would just be a heartbreaker in terms of everything, right? Like financially, probably more so than anything. In a vacuum, it's a great fight. It makes sense ranking wise, but the path to getting there is just a little devastating for Michael Chandler. I'd like to see Arman Sarukian fight someone on that level. I think the Beneil Dariush thing is probably a little more logical at this point and more likely. It's just timing. He doesn't want to wait for whatever. He maybe thinks Chandler is more accessible. But if I'm Michael Chandler going back, I guess the perfect way to put a bow on the show, since we were talking about Conor to start, I'm probably sitting, despite all these headlines, I'm waiting until International Fight Week of next year if I have to this fight. And if it doesn't happen by then maybe you start looking at other things. But or UFC 300, right? Like UFC's ideal scenario, if it's not happening this year, if Conor gets all this stuff cleared up, they probably want Chandler, Conor, UFC 300. Probably the plan after that would be International Fight Week of next year.
Okay. Nolan or goes?
Yeah, I mean, I get the call out from Sarukian. He's in a weird equation right now, right? He doesn't talk and he doesn't get fights, and nobody, like, we hear a lot of times, oh, so-and-so is having a tough time finding a fight. I think the fact that we saw what the matchup was last weekend, like, that's an indicator the UFC is indeed struggling to find him fights. And that's not a knock on Neto BJJ. That's just more like a guy that's a top, 10 guy essentially fighting a short notice fight against a guy that has had ups and downs in recent fights. So I think that's an indicator that's true. It seemed like after the Moicano was one of the few guys that said yes, and then he blows his knee out. So you gotta get somebody on the other side to sign up to fight this guy. Maybe now that he's talking a little bit and people are kind of advocating for him as being somebody that's very talented and maybe doesn't get enough respect, maybe that will gravitate some of these top guys to fight him. But I don't hate the effort. I don't hate the try, and I get why it happened. But I also think if I'm Michael Chandler, like, man, there's no way that I'm jumping at the opportunity to take a very tough fight against a guy that, in terms of has a small fraction of the name value and recognition that Conor McGregor has. I mean, it's a no-brainer to sit and wait a couple extra months and hope that the McGregor matchup comes to fruition.
As he said before, he's not interested in fighting a guy who starts his name with a silent T.
Goes, you get the final word.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Chandler's name being attached to the biggest name in all of mixed martial arts and then dropping down to fight a very good fighter, don't get me wrong. It's just I don't think it's something the UFC wants to put together. They're going to have to look somewhere else. But I'd love to see the fight. On paper, the fight seems like it'd be a lot of fun. But it just, name value just doesn't really go together.
I want to see Chandler versus Dariush if they're not going to go the McGregor route. Yeah. All right, guys. Great stuff.
Who does Sarukian fight then?
Sarukian, probably the loser of Gaethje versus Poirier. But I don't know if they're going to want to because they're up there, and
yeah, good luck.
I mean, Gaethje just kind of did that. He just kind of said, all right, I'll fight someone below me in Fiziev. So you got to take your hat off to him for that. So I don't know if he would do it again. And I don't know that Poirier has many fights left. So I think those guys are just focused on the title. They'd probably shoot down the question if we even asked it to them. Great stuff, guys. Way to step up here on Juneteenth, the holiday that's now being observed here in the United States. So I hope you all enjoy your holiday, and thanks for spending an hour with us here on Spinning Back Clique. We're here every Monday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, live. So join us here, and as you can see, we take your questions and comments when we can as well, and you're part of the show. So let a friend know. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button. That totally helps us with the algorithm and getting things out there. So please do that. and leave a comment. I'm in there always throwing elbows and I'm answering. So at least you know you can get a reply from me. We'll see you all next week, folks. Go out and be a champion. Talk to you soon.